Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for calling this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for testifying today. Last week we took another step towards socializing housing. Last week, Congress nearly doubled the $40 billion in housing support it had already appropriated since the pandemic. Calls for additional assistance were being made before almost any of the December spending was ever distributed to households. Billions in stimulus checks, unemployment insurance, often exceeding work income, and other welfare meant most households at risk of homelessness had already received more money from government than they'd lost in income. We've likely exceeded the point where someone who's worked hard, made sacrifices, paid their bills, cared for their families, but received little of this government largesse is asking themselves, how is any of this fair? And last week's bill added to an already vast government role in housing. The number and cost of the many housing subsidies programs just boggles the mind. The mortgage interest deduction, capital gains exclusion on home sales, tax deduction on property taxes, FHA, VA, USDA mortgage insurance, and Ginnie MBS guarantees, government-induced down payment assistance programs, LIHTC, an overlapping array of HUD programs. There's project-based rental assistance, tenant-based rental assistance, public housing funding, Section 2002, housing for the elderly, Section 811, housing for persons with disabilities, Section 521, rural rental housing, CDBG, home block grants, homelessness. It's unbelievable. And then, of course, we have the GSEs, which have historically subsidized mortgages. Folks, government is the problem here, not the solution. 50 years and countless hundreds of billions of dollars in federal housing support have had no meaningful impact on home ownership rates. In 1970, the home ownership rate in America was 64%. In 2020, 65.8. And as one of our witnesses will testify, Black ownership levels are similar to when the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. In 1960, Black home ownership was about 38%. In 2019, just 42%. Why is this? It's because government policies mostly are making housing more expensive. Local zoning laws restrict the supply of housing, which drives up home prices and rents. The GSEs, FHA, and VA subsidize the debt financing component of home purchases, and those subsidies are passed on into the form of higher home prices. Subsidized debt also encourages people to take on more debt than they can handle. We saw how badly that turned out in 2008. The state of housing in America affirms the urgency of financing reform. As we'll hear today, the housing market is cyclical. It's a question really of when, not if, there will eventually be a housing downturn. And the GSEs and the housing finance system are just not prepared. FHFA Director Calabria in the last administration made significant progress in reforming the system. Thanks to their good work, the net worth sweep has been suspended. The GSEs finally have begun to build capital under a constructive new capital rule. For more than 12 years after the financial crisis, Congress has still not addressed the fundamental flaws in the system that led to the crisis. The system is still dominated by the GSE duopoly, and these $6 trillion behemoths actually have an even larger market share than they had before the crisis. They certainly remain too big to fail. The GSEs and the system also remain gravely undercapitalized. Just as before the financial crisis, these flaws in the system continue to encourage excessive risk-taking. They risk future taxpayer bailouts, and they threaten financial stability. And just as before the financial crisis, these flaws also continue to undermine the availability and affordability of housing in America. The solution is not to double down on the old ways by simply easing underwriting standards, lowering FHA premiums, or further subsidizing mortgage debt. We need to try something new. We need to scale back the role of government and leverage the power of free enterprise to promote housing for all Americans. For more than 30 years, chairmen and ranking members from both sides of the aisle on this committee have worked together on an ongoing basis to improve our housing market. I'm committing to working with you, Mr. Chairman, and other members of this committee to continue that tradition in this Congress. And in that spirit, yesterday, I released principles for reforming the housing finance system. Now, these principles build on the bipartisan efforts of current members of this committee from both sides of the aisle. And Mr. Chairman, I think these principles also share considerable overlap with the principles you laid out in September of 2019. I think we need to end too big to fail GSE model of privatizing gains and socializing the losses. by permitting the chartering of competitors to the GSEs. We need to recapitalize the GSEs and end the conservatorship. And these reforms need to be done in an incremental and realistic manner that continues to foster a liquid secondary market for mortgages and the continued availability of the 30-year mortgage while promoting equitable access for mortgage lenders of all types. These reforms should represent the rule of law and rights of the GSE shareholders that were infringed by the Third Amendment. I know we have significant differences about the role of government in the housing market, but I do believe that a compromise is possible. There's a lot of work that can be productively done on a bipartisan basis this Congress. And as part of that work, I look forward to hearing from Treasury Secretary Yellen as soon, since that is required by the latest changes to the PSPAs. And then I hope we will act together. Thank you.